So our last and third presentation this evening features the work of Ultramoderne, located in Providence, Rhode Island, and led by Yasmin Vobis and Forrest. Yasmin teaches architecture at the Rhode Island School of Design. She received her Bachelor of Arts from the University of California, Berkeley, and her Master of Architecture from Princeton University. She is also a recipient of the 2016 Rome Prize in Architecture. Erin is an assistant professor of architecture at the Rhode Island School of Design and has a Bachelor of Arts and a Master of Architecture from Princeton University. In their submission, they question the role of permanence in architecture, noting that when solidity is the focus, it privileges the thing over the actions it makes possible. Related to this, they see their task as creating conditions for new types of action, the result of which are spaces of improvisational nature that demand an active public and are open to reinterpretation and use. Please join me in welcoming Yasmin and Erin.
Hi, it's an incredible honor to be here. I'd like to say thank you to the Architectural League. As has been mentioned before, of course, Anne, Marta, and Matt were completely instrumental in making the exhibition outside possible. I'd also like to thank our team at Ultramoderne in Providence, everyone that helped on the projects and the exhibition, of course, as well as our friends and mentors, some of who are in the audience. It's great to see you, and thank you for all the support.
Okay, so we're going to start with a story. So Yasmin and I met in fall 2006. Shortly thereafter, we began our first project. At the time, live webcams were still in vogue, and Bryant Park had a pretty good one. If you spent enough time on the site, you could find a direct link to the latest image, which was updated every 10 minutes. So we began downloading the images and collecting them on a hard drive without much of a purpose in mind, except maybe to create a little time-lapse video. They became a nice chronicle of the use of one of the most photogenic public spaces in the country. The way people would move chairs around, congregate, sunbathe, etc. It was fun. After a few days, we had compiled a few hundred images and started to get concerned about storage space. It wasn't the days of floppy disks, but still, we needed to do something with these or get them off the drive. So we started overlaying them and to see what a whole day in Bryant Park would look like in a single image. What was amazing was that a completely different chronicle of the space began to emerge. Individual activities may have seemed important in single images got blurred over in favor of a haze of motion. Blurred clusters of activity now took precedence over singular acts. And the massive transformations of the site over the course of the year, from lawn to concert venue to fashion show to skating rink, became more apparent, as fascinating as the human dramas that played out on the lawn over the summer. Days turned into weeks and activities became hazier still. Human motion settled into a gray blur over the site and event architectures began to emerge. Entire weeks' worth of images were given over to construction and demolition of various tents and stages, forming quasi-architectural lacunae in the life of this iconic public space. As a year of collecting images passed, we pulled the plug and made the final image in the series, a one-year average. Here, individual actions completely fall away, and the architecture, both permanent and temporary, emerges as the only marker of stability on a site completely in flux. This project, innocent as it was at the time, served to crystallize an approach that revels in the simultaneity of the architectural project as a conceptual, social, and material practice. Architecture only makes sense as a means of bringing disparate things together: drawing and building, sustainability and aesthetics, rule-based geometries and resistant materials, unconventional spaces, and even more unconventional inhabitants. As the Bryant Park averages began to make clear, these seemingly contradictory aspects of the project are able to coexist partially because they exist on disparate and overlapping timescales. Over the years working together, so far we have worked to follow the idea to combine rather than to isolate in the hopes of finding new and unexpected forms for building and for living. So this evening we will share three projects that have sought to merge the two different definitions of the word structure: that of literal structure, or how things stand up, exemplified by the Shukov radio tower seen on the left, and that of organization or social structure exemplified by the Alda van Eyck project on the right. Something that we've become more and more interested in recently is how these two definitions of structure can be put in dialogue with one another. That experiments in material structure might push us towards alternative spatial and thus social organizations, and vice versa.
So, the first project we're going to share is called Four Corners, and this was actually a project for the Boston Society of Architects. They held a competition for an exhibition on mass timber in the city, and I'm sure all of you have heard the kind of sustainability arguments for mass timber, but I think for us it's also interesting to think about the kind of potentials for architects to rethink architecture and structure with this new material. It's a bit like beginning of the 20th century when steel and concrete came to the fore, and there was all this sense of experimentation and the kind of new things that could be possible with the material. But we also kind of looked backward a little bit, so we kind of looked at the history of heavy timber construction and timber construction in the Northeast, and in particular barns. Because barns they have this kind of incredible fit between the structure of the space and the space itself. The kind of form of the barn is so well integrated with the actual structural system. It's a kind of architecture of structure and space, we would say. And of course, barns are made up through these things called bents. So these are these kind of two-dimensional constructs that can be kind of arrayed in progression to create the space of the barn. But of course, thinking then of the space of barns and in relationship to CLT, this new engineered mass timber technology, there's this friction, right? You can't just reproduce the kind of two-dimensional bents and have it kind of work. You have to kind of think about using this planar material and perhaps start to build these kind of complementary corners that could start to be more rigid and kind of come together in a new way. So starting out, I guess with the kind of form of the barn, taking it apart and rearranging these complementary corners, you can imagine creating this kind of very, this endless field of these things where all the kind of three-dimensional bents are now interdependent. Let's see. And for the installation, I mean, you can see really that the barn, the kind of interior spatiality of the barn is turned inside out. It creates this kind of series of rooms that open up to its context. So, corridors, these kind of pockets of space around the installation that open to the windows, as well as a little courtyard in the center.
So this is the image of the final installation in place, and it looks really easy. It wasn't quite as easy as it was. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of the design and construction process. So we were teamed up as part of the exhibition with a timber erector based in New Hampshire called Benson Wood, and a mass timber fabricator based in northern Quebec province, 10 hours north of Montreal, called Nordic Structures. And basically, the way the process worked was that Nordic makes these 8-foot by 64-foot slabs of solid wood that you can see in their factory on the left, and then they cut them down to your specifications using their CNC cutting devices, which you see on the right. And we had to work with both companies very carefully through a year-long design process in order to come up with a series of details that were kind of clean and spare, but also were easy to assemble and could still be fabricated by the machines, which had their own limitations. And what was great about the process, even though it was a lot of work at the time, was that the results of it, if you planned it out carefully enough, were that you could take this rough structural material and create very large spans with it and have 5 different pieces come together with a tolerance of only 1/16 of an inch. And typically CLT is used in kind of commodity circumstances, and so most of what they usually do is cut rectangles out of rectangles, and so we had these efficiency targets to meet in order to get the project in on budget. So we had to kind of work through the space packing exercise as well to figure out how all these crazy pieces fit onto the 8-foot by 64-foot slabs of CLT. And we worked with a small group of friends and Parsons students, 3 of whom are shown here, to construct the project in the field. They're lifting this roof panel, which probably weighs about 200 pounds. Despite the kind of bulk and heaviness of these panels, the project went together really easily. It went together in about 3 days. And what was really nice about the final project was that it didn't result in a kind of single image, but that it was really necessary to kind of move around and through the installation in order to understand it and to see how it presented itself from all these different aspects. And we also worked with a video artist based here in New York, Noah Klersfeld, who's in the audience tonight, to figure out how to program the little courtyard that Yasmin showed in order to encourage people to actually move through and into the space. So he very generously donated 3 of his videos to play in the courtyard during the entire exhibition. And we also had Nordic drill these little peepholes in the wall of the corridor so that you could see that, you'd be drawn into the corridor to see that video through those holes, and then also allow it to bring a kind of lighting effect into the courtyard. And that's the view out.
So the second project is actually also a competition that was for the Chicago Architecture Biennial last year. For us, the prompt was very intriguing because they were essentially asking designers to design small kiosks that would actually remain in the city after the biennial would leave. And so this idea that it would leave something permanent, this kind of act of generosity to the city, was very just interesting to us. And of course, the site is this incredible place where the kind of relentless grid of the city meets the beach. And starting the project, we couldn't help but think of these kind of 2 very Chicago progeny, really. On the one hand, Mises' experiments in long-span structures and this kind of flatness, such as at IIT Crown Hall. And on the right, the Ray and Charles Eames film, Powers of 10, which asks this incredible question of what happens to our understanding of things when you actually jump scales. So questions of scale were really important. The competition actually stipulated a 200 square foot kiosk. And we felt that in order to really have a kind of more active engagement with the city, we would try and expand that as much as possible. And so it kind of became this quest, I would say, to design the kind of largest, thinnest wood roof possible. And then also, being right on the lake, there was this incredible opportunity to engage the horizon. And so the project tries to kind of use the kind of large flatness of the roof to both look at the horizon of Lake Michigan beyond, but also when you get up above the roof, that the roof becomes this kind of abstract plane that can reframe the city. So the plan is incredibly simple. Just to give you guys a sense, the space that's labeled vendor is the kind of square footage that was asked for in the competition. And then the dashed line is what we proposed. And so in order to do something like this, of course, it had to be incredibly simple. And so it was really also trying to understand the project of kind of dissolving the boundary of the kiosk into the city. So really encouraging kind of different users to really come into the space and use them as they see fit. So really, there's these kind of 3 elements to the project: a very large wood roof, it's 56 by 56 feet, a set of 13 columns that support the roof that are arranged in this kind of radial pattern, and then a kind of leisurely but engaged public that would come to occupy it.
So in order to make this shift in scale, we had to really pare down our material palette to the minimum possible. So we knew that we had to have the structure. So we worked with CLT again for this project. And then for the enclosures, we just decided we didn't have much specification on what the enclosures needed to enclose. And so we thought, well, maybe chain link fence is enough. So we just worked with chain link mesh fabric, but both materials in a kind of scale and context that's a little different from where you usually see them. And we were pretty quickly confronted with this question of, well, okay, what is the biggest wood roof that you can make? And we knew that that we could get these 8-foot by 64-foot panels of CLT, but it turned out that the real limitation was not on production, but on shipping, and that the largest size you could reasonably ship was on a 53-foot trailer, and we somehow managed to convince them to put a 56-foot piece onto a 53-foot trailer, and I don't know how that got across the border, but it worked, and that set the dimensions of the project. And then we worked with a colleague of ours at RISD, Brett Schneider, who's also senior associate at Guy Nordenson and Associates Structural Engineers, to really work through the design and the feasibility of the project in order to figure out what was the minimum number of columns and what was the maximum span between them. And you can see the way the columns are these kind of fin shapes that are arrayed around radially. That was partly to kind of force your attention outwards, and partly to resist what we learned were very strong winds coming off of Lake Michigan. And so the scheme is fairly simple in order to, or seemed fairly simple at the start, which was in order to get this kind of flat wood roof that behaved somewhat like a concrete roof. We would just take 7 panels of CLT and run them north-south, and then put another 7 panels right on top of that running east-west, and support that on 13 columns. What we didn't realize at the time, we were acting kind of naively, was that usually CLT is supported with beams, and so this turned out to be a kind of first of its kind structure, thanks to Brett's perseverance on the project. So one of the major crises in the project was actually figuring out how to get those 2 layers of CLT to work together, structurally but also economically. So we worked through kind of frantically through the last summer, through many different fastener schemes, including one that involved a lot of glue. And you can see the scheme on the left, which was one of the earlier schemes, involved about 15,000 screws, which cost $2 each and wouldn't have worked. And the scheme on the right, fortunately, got it down to about 3,000 screws. And then we were, of course, as Yasmin mentioned, looking at Mies van der Rohe as a kind of spiritual godfather of the project. And especially at the new National Gallery, which they raised up on the roof, up on the columns at the end of the project. And we thought, well, wouldn't it be romantic if that was how it was built? And so we showed this image in the competition. And then after working through it with the fabricator and the structural erector, it turned out that actually was the best way for safety reasons, interestingly enough. So they ended up building it just a few feet off the ground on steel shoring, and then using pneumatic jacks to raise it up. That's view from the roof halfway through. And then in order to keep that wood ceiling surface as clean as possible, we worked with Brett and with Nordic to develop this column capital detail that actually hangs the roof, suspends it from above rather than supports it from below.
And then I guess the second material that's quite visible in the project is also this kind of rough material of chain link. And we're quite interested in it because, I mean, on the one hand, you see chain link everywhere. It's usually, stretched horizontally between very kind of heavy vertical posts, but also it has this interesting history in that it was invented by a textile manufacturer. And so we were really interested in trying to think, is there a way to treat it as a textile and, with this kind of lightness to it? And so we worked on the detailing to actually stretch it vertically between the roof plane and the ground, and also to eliminate all the framing at the corners of these volumes so that there would just be this kind of very light touch in the space to delineate those 2 volumes. So the site is actually just north of the Shedd Aquarium and the Field Museum in Chicago, and it's right on the lake, and has this incredible view back to the city. We were very lucky. And one other aspect of the project, I guess, it being out in the world, we really wanted to kind of extend the life of the project into the night. And so we developed a lighting installation that would kind of illuminate the two volumes below through two different color temperatures of LEDs. So one warm, one cool, one more like daylight, one more like moonlight, and then to program these in such a way that they would start to come on just a few hours before sunset and then kind of pulsate throughout the night. And so you saw some two views of those at night. And I should mention these photos are by Naho Kubota, who's an incredible photographer. And she took this one, which really kind of startled us because it looked so much like our initial model. And we kind of really enjoyed that.
And this final project is our proposal for the PS1 Warm-Up competition, which we did this past winter. And we were really interested in the project in kind of making a hybrid between what have become the two standard typologies of the PS1 proposals. One is the kind of environment which takes place under a canopy, and the other is the kind of sculptural or iconic large-scale project that's visible from the street. And we thought that the way to approach this was actually to think about it in different terms through that of the boundary, which we saw as this kind of fundamental architectural act that creates the kind of basic difference between two spaces inside and out, and thus kind of facilitates different types of culture between those different types of spaces. And we were working at PS1, which is formerly a public school, and so we started looking at old schoolyards and how the schoolyard kind of functioned as this interesting place that was attached to the adjacent institution, but not really of it. It's this place that's usually lightly veiled by a chain link boundary that protects it both from the harsh realities of the city, but also from the school and the kind of stern teachers inside. And so it's this place where students escape even just for a few minutes every day in order to kind of play their games and actually get into mischief and formulate their own rules, which then kind of come back and infect their work in the school and out in the city beyond.
So the question really was, how do you kind of create this space apart in a city as dense as New York? And we, looking at the space of the courtyard, we really wanted to inscribe something very simple. And so this geometry of an inscribed circle that relates to the context but also sets itself apart from it seemed promising. And so the project is really about the creation of this clearing in the courtyard, a kind of space for recess, as Aaron mentioned. And you can see in the site plan, it's something that kind of fills the courtyard. It's something that has to be kind of negotiated on your way to the museum, or to a music event or whatever you're there to do. And it's also something that's very tall. We proposed a 50-foot tall volume that would kind of very lightly screen the city beyond. To create this kind of necessary precondition for fantasy and for play, this kind of removal. And that boundary is really, we propose to make it out of two layers of chain link. So one is kind of vertical outer layer and one that's more playful, one that's just left galvanized, another that's brightly colored. To create this kind of boundary also that has a certain depth that could be, that's kind of ready for exploration.
So our initial idea was to just make this 80-foot diameter, 50-foot tall cylinder out of chain link and call it a day. And so we did a test in our studio, and I don't know if you've ever worked with chain link that's not already stretched, but it doesn't behave. And so we zip-tied the whole thing together, and we were like, that's the trick. It's going to be done. And then this picture was the moment of perfection, and then it fell over. So then we went and talked to Brett Schneider again, and we said, okay, how can we really do this? And we worked through a long series of structural models in order to figure out how to make this thing stand up, but also how to kind of preserve that idea of the lightness of the boundary. And what was a kind of interesting outcome of this result was that we ended up using the same materials as in Chicago, but in inverse proportion. And in the case here, both the wood and the chain link are performing structurally. So it took a while to figure out how to, for Brett to figure out how to model it in a kind of satisfactory way so he would be convinced that it would be safe. And it turned out that the kind of resulting concept was kind of analogous to a bicycle wheel, except stretched horizontally out of plane. So there's a timber tension ring up at the top 50 feet in the air that's supported by a series of canted columns that are kind of analogous to those bicycle spokes, that's then all pulled down and made stable by the chain link that's tensioned to the ground. And of course there's been 19 years of PS1 installations before us, so we don't really know what's under the ground, so we came up with this flexible system of columns that could be kind of moved back and forth on site depending on what we found, and that would also serve to give a kind of subtle hierarchy to the interior space.
Yeah, so the hierarchy is important because it's absolutely not just a neutral space. I think that that the way the columns kind of enter the space creates, I think, an order that we imagined would be kind of used for different programming possibilities. So on the one hand, there's the warm-ups and there's the kind of free play during the day. But on the other hand, we imagined that players and performers could kind of take advantage of some of these geometries and use them for kind of rule-based movements. So you see some images here. Also, of course, we imagined that this would be scaled to the mass and would kind of be able to embrace that kind of large quantity of people that comes to PS1 during the warm-ups.
And the two layers of chain link serve multiple purposes. One was to create these kind of back alleyways of a secondary system of circulation and storage for some of the materials in the project, but also to kind of create this kind of moire effect between the two layers that would shift and change as you moved, and thus kind of necessitate moving around and through the project in order to fully understand it. So here in the section you can see how that kind of inner layer moves in and out, and even in the still image the way you get these kind of interference patterns between the two layers. And this resulted in a kind of interesting design challenge because we had to figure out how to take something that was a perfect cylinder on the exterior and project all the openings and panelization inwards to this kind of strangely shaped object on the interior that that created this kind of interesting dialogue between the kind of platonic exterior and something a little stranger inside. The double layer also helped to shade the courtyard, which I'm sure many of you know can be kind of brutal in the summer, but also to cast shadows onto the ground to create a kind of third layer in this moire effect.
We also imagined that there would be a series of kind of elements for playing, so hula hoops, jump ropes, frisbees, these kind of very minimal tools for rule-based movement that could be stored between the layers of chain link. And of course, continuing our investigations with chain link, we imagined there could be these kind of overscaled balls that could confound both the scale of the players, but also the scale of the space, as well as these kind of very large scale model trees that were, supposed to be made simply of lumber and construction netting for diffusing light and water. But really, all these elements kind of conspire together to create this wireframe world. It's this kind of very, I guess a space apart where we imagined play would be possible. And we also worked with a lighting designer to think about the kind of reading of the volume at night from the street and to kind of find a way to make that very, very large volume kind of hover in the space at night.
So again, in order to make something so large, we had to kind of economize and treat everything structurally. And so this was the basic kit of parts, a bunch of wood and chain link and some ground screws to support it. We also had to think through how to lay it out, knowing that we probably wouldn't be able to hire a surveyor to do it. So we had to take that kind of interior unusual geometry and think about how to rationalize it. And then we worked with a contractor to think through how it would be built, and it turned out that probably the easiest way to do it would have been to build similar to Chicago, build the entire timber ring just a few feet off the ground, attach all the columns to it with hinge connections, as well as all the bales of chain link, and then lift it all at once in a single move, turning the construction itself into a kind of event of the project. And we'll just finish by playing this animation.
So our last and third presentation this evening features the work of Ultramoderne, located in Providence, Rhode Island, and led by Yasmin Vobis and Forrest. Yasmin teaches architecture at the Rhode Island School of Design. She received her Bachelor of Arts from the University of California, Berkeley, and her Master of Architecture from Princeton University. She is also a recipient of the 2016 Rome Prize in Architecture. Erin is an assistant professor of architecture at the Rhode Island School of Design and has a Bachelor of Arts and a Master of Architecture from Princeton University. In their submission, they question the role of permanence in architecture, noting that when solidity is the focus, it privileges the thing over the actions it makes possible. Related to this, they see their task as creating conditions for new types of action, the result of which are spaces of improvisational nature that demand an active public and are open to reinterpretation and use. Please join me in welcoming Yasmin and Erin.
Hi, it's an incredible honor to be here. I'd like to say thank you to the Architectural League. As has been mentioned before, of course, Anne, Marta, and Matt were completely instrumental in making the exhibition outside possible. I'd also like to thank our team at Ultramoderne in Providence, everyone that helped on the projects and the exhibition, of course, as well as our friends and mentors, some of who are in the audience. It's great to see you, and thank you for all the support.
Okay, so we're going to start with a story. So Yasmin and I met in fall 2006. Shortly thereafter, we began our first project. At the time, live webcams were still in vogue, and Bryant Park had a pretty good one. If you spent enough time on the site, you could find a direct link to the latest image, which was updated every 10 minutes. So we began downloading the images and collecting them on a hard drive without much of a purpose in mind, except maybe to create a little time-lapse video. They became a nice chronicle of the use of one of the most photogenic public spaces in the country. The way people would move chairs around,